Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Naru's Corner. And this week we are not really going to be creating anything, but we are going to take a look at something because a fellow islander wrote me a message, and I am sure I'm not going to be pronouncing it right, but Oknog, Ocnog. I'm sorry, I can't really probably pronounce it, but yeah, anyways. Oknog wrote me that he says a few questions about how to reduce the lag in your games, because we've all been there, let's face it. You want to create something amazing and you just place in one too many animators or update your game way too often to time triggers, and suddenly the game is not playable at all. It might even crash, and it's something you should really look out for when you're creating your multiplayer games. Because I don't think this is much of a problem for you guys out there who create single player games. It's not that hard, to stay within some limits for single player, because you can do much more there. But once you step into the multiplayer, suddenly you discover that things that worked for you before doesn't work anymore. You have to delete like half the stuff. So let's just jump back into the editor, and I will literally just go question after question what Oknog wrote to me, and we will probably go over it, what you should and shouldn't avoid. And right off the bat, and it's not the first question, but since I've used this as an example, there are welds. Welding is super important to save whatever you can, because if I didn't weld this, can you imagine like so many moving parts for the dragon head? If I unweld the head, you can see how many parts it is, with the scales and with the nose. And I actually modeled it just with snowballs, and that I've used these aloe vera leaves for the scales and stuff. And it was so many parts, and once I actually I just welded it and set this to follow, so the head actually follows the path, and the body, each individual body part is following the previous one, so it creates this nice effect of dragon actually flying through the air. And so anyways, once I've welded it turned these thousands of blocks into just like 14 or 15 parts, right? And it definitely works if you, because Oknog was confused if there is some actual help for animators if you weld it together, and there definitely is, because it simplifies the colliders, and I think everything that is calculating for it is way much simpler, so you should always weld whatever you can together. And one thing that I've discovered that really helps a lot is, of course, turning off the colliders. If there's anything in your game that is just for aesthetic purposes, like distant buildings, or for this example, just flying dragons, whatever, I don't need players to ride those dragons, right? They are just gonna be in the air. So I will turn colliders for all these parts, and it makes everything so much smoother. If I just go here and I select everything, you have seen before how you've seen before how smooth it was, right? But if I turn on the colliders and now test the game, I'll be so angry if this goes smoothly, because it would ruin everything. Of course I would be glad if it worked, but it would ruin everything. Alright, here we are, and I am not even sure if I will be able to move. You can see that so far I've seen 3 frames, wow, and I don't even know where the dragons are now. So yeah, this is what turning on the colliders has done to the game, and it's just 2 dragons, right? I mean, it's thousands of blocks, but they are welded, so there is some minimal optimization, but the greatest difference is actually turning on and off the colliders. And I will try to get back to the edge from this. probably gonna be for a long time before the game picks it up. Oh, there we go. So anyways, turning off the colliders, really big thing. If you are building something like a castle or a city or something, I'm sure there are parts that are inaccessible to the player, or in general just for really being pretty. So turn off the colliders if you can, and if you need to keep the keep the boundaries of something but still need to use like really pretty walls, you can just weld the wall together, turn off the collider and place an impassable barrier instead. It is way simpler for the game to calculate one impassable barrier than the welded colliders together, because it always tries to optimize, but it's never gonna be as good. So you can replace everything, like a floor, on a roof, anything. So go for it. Turn off as many colliders as possible. I generally turn off everything I can because, well, I usually use a lot of blocks and animators anyway, so it is like really impressive that the game runs under the conditions I put it in. So yeah, I'm just gonna turn off the colliders again so it doesn't happen again. Right, for next step, so after the welds and colliders, oh yeah, right, welds, I'm sorry. Before I change the subject, there was one more question. If it's better to weld everything together, like the whole house together, or if you should weld like something that makes sense, some smaller parts, right? It's as easy as possible, like one wall, so it makes just one rectangular prism of a collider and a floor separately, and then the roof, right? And the answer is you should actually separate them, because the game seems to have a problem with more complicated welds that have like a lot of blocks in them, so it's always safer to split it into few smaller segments that make even more sense, because if you go back and want to change something, it's always nice to have them separated, right? You just delete one wall. But yeah, as far as the game goes, it is actually better to separate big builds into multiple welds and not just select everything and weld it to one try and weld, because that sometimes caused issues with working with this weld. I think there have been some blocks missing or something. I'm not sure about this. I've just been told that it's way better to use like that. That's what I'm going with it, right? Okay, so next thing, and I think this is the most obvious one, even Oknok said so, it's this time triggers. If you use way too many time triggers with, I hit my game logics, there we go. You use way too many time triggers with a really small time here to call it, to call it again. It can cause quite a lot of lag, because if I would, for example, like spawn entity every 0.03 seconds, it would be really bad, right? Even for a single player, it wouldn't be really great, because first I would definitely over spam the game with the blocks, which is not great by itself, but also updating this game way too many times, it's not great. And I'm not talking about one time trigger, and that is the point I'm trying to make here. If I have one time trigger and using it for updating more things, because I could have like global storage, right? I could have like global storage or two, and this would have some instructions in it, right? Like this would be like update UI and stuff. Then I would have another update kill count. I'm not sure what we're creating here. Yeah, right. You would have all these instructions, and you could have another global storage, and you need to like update position of something. You should cram as many things as possible, if it's really necessary, into one global into one time trigger, if it's possible. If not, create two, but try to use as low count as possible, like one or two time triggers. I'm always trying to stay within like one time trigger, because it is very simple to just call it from here, right? I can call from one time trigger all these instructions, and I could call so many other things. And this of course goes for recursive functions. If I create a recursive function for update kill count, that would be the same delay as I had before. And I am just gonna call the function again, and in this case it won't do anything. It will just keep calling itself after 0.03 seconds, and it's basically the same thing as if I just put the kill count into the time trigger, right? And there's the same problem. You should try not to update anything that doesn't need updating. Like, there's no sense for me to update a kill count every 0.03 seconds, because there is nothing to update. For instance, with the kill count, you always know that it's gonna change when someone gets a kill, right? So you should rather update it on some event listener with on kill event on entities, right? So try to use as few time triggers as possible. I'm sure that all of you know that, but sometimes it needs to be said. And if you can't avoid using it, try to maximize the time as much as you can. And of course, I know, and I am using 0.03 seconds as much as any other person, right? Because it is so much useful for so many stuffs, and you can get away with a lot of things. But if you use multiple time triggers with this, it can cause quite a bit of lag, and that of course we don't want, right? Otherwise you end up with the laggy game as I did before. So I'll just check what was the other question. Right, animations. Animations and particles. They are sort of similar in a way that you should actually not overdo it with the number of them that you have in a scene. And also, when I'm talking about it, lights, there are gonna be some changes to lights probably, but as it stands now, you really have to watch how many light sources you use, because for example, like burning torches or something, I'm sure you've noticed, if you place like, I don't know who would do that, by the way, but I might have done that. If you place like, I don't know, 100 or 200 torches on one place, it's not great for the game. It tends to lag sometimes if you're on a slower device. Of course, there is a lot of calculating the game has to do for the lights themselves. And the same thing goes for, as I've said, animations, because you can like place so many animated objects in the scene, right? And sometimes we tend to forget that there are some limitations when it comes to this, because I create some really insanely complicated stuff that doesn't need to be complicated. That I just, I like the look of it. Like if I'm supposed to like create something, I always want to move because it looks so much impressive. But the truth is that once you run it in a multiplayer afterwards, it definitely won't work, because it would just lag all the game altogether, and just no one would even be able to connect to it probably. So I did some asking around to just check with the guys that are responsible for multiplayer, and the answer I got is you should use ideally between like 40-50 animated objects in the scene. That is like the ideal number to avoid any lags or something. And of course, if you can go lower, right? You can always do more to optimize it, just to be on the safe side of the things, right? So animated objects for either through these animators or through the script. If you need to have more in the game, it's always better to deactivate them when you are not using them. That goes for lights as well, and for particle effects. Particle effects are beautiful, but if you're gonna like overdo it with them, if you're gonna generate whole walls of fire and stuff, you can really mess up the feeling of the game when the FPS drop to 10 afterwards, after you generate the wall, right? I've actually used particles to show like rays that go from guns, but the way I did it was that I took this particle of like glowing line, and I just calculated every time a player shoots through script, all the way from the position of the gun to the position of a raycast hit, and I spammed these lines across, and it looked super cool. Like, you see this fire line, for example. So that's what I used, and I just said in a script that for the distance that you go, it should go over and over again, and just spam these across the whole thing. And I created lasers with it, and it looked really great. But the fact is that I ended up having to redo this script because it was unusable once like 3 people started firing at once, and that was all these particles generated. It got really crazy in a really short time, so this is something you should really look out for. So particles, animations, and something else, and I already forgot. I swear to God, I'm like a gold. Anyways, you should limit your lights, your particles, and your animators as much as you can, and if you need to have more in your game, turn them off and on with time triggers, trigger zones or anything else that fits your game, but try to not have active ones all the time, right? If you have like 200 active animators, your game won't run for people with slow devices or for multiplayers. And it's a real shame if your game is really good and you just throw it away with this and that it's not going to be playable. So yes, next question before I get even more entangled in this. Optimize button, what it exactly does was the next question, right? Yes. So optimize, as you know, if you have blocks in the game that you haven't welded, because you can create welds by yourself, right? But if you didn't weld everything, and it can happen to everyone, Optimize actually does weld these together, and it tries to weld them as effectively as possible. It is just so you don't have to go through everything and weld everything, but still have the game optimized. So this is actually what happens when you update a game to workshop, because the optimize button does what the export does anyway, but this is something that you can see in the editor what it does before exporting, right? And it will weld everything that is not referenced in the scripts. This is important because if you reference something like in a label, if I just quickly go here and place a label, if you have something that either has a script or is referenced in something else or has a label like this, if I go and optimize again, see the zero optimize because this is already welded, and this is referenced in the label. So if you have something in a label, or if you create a group and set force not to optimize on export, sorry, this won't get welded either. And you can have many reasons for not welding it, right? You want to have like a destructible wall, or you just want something actually accessible with like interactions, but you use these references in the game, so it might not be sorry, there's a lot of ways that there are a lot of reasons why you wouldn't want that. So this is the way to go. If you want to have some blocks unwelded, it will always add something, something more that the game has to deal with, as opposed to welds. Of course, I'm not saying that welds aren't like hard on the game. Like there is still a lot of the game needs to deal with, but there is a difference between 500 blocks and one weld that knows that has these 500 blocks inside. It's definitely easier. So optimizing can weld everything together the way it will be during the publishing process. You can use this button to see if you didn't overlook something, if you didn't forget to add something to a group that shouldn't be welded, or mark something with a label. And yes, next question. I don't even know if there is a next question. Welding, yes, sure. Optimize button. Okay, I think this is actually it, guys. It's actually it. Yeah, of course, there was a really nice, detail from Oknog that removing AFK players will help. And yes, it's true. If you have some AFK players in the game, you can remove them through script, and it always helps because there is much less data that the game has to deal with. So that's good. Yes, I think that's actually everything I wanted to talk about. Let's see. Let's just go over everything we've said, and we'll see. So, welding and turning off the colliders, big part of optimizing your game, is really colliders enabled on really complicated welds are the worst thing ever, and not if you have something not welded at all, it's really unpleasant if the game has to load everything and deal with that. So weld everything you can, weld in a simple manner, divide your buildings into multiple welds, and turn off any colliders that are not necessary for your game. Everything that player can't get their hands on, just turn the colliders off. It is great, and your game performance is going to reflect on that. Time triggers, use as few as possible. This is an answer to everything that you might ask about performance. So if you can use less of anything, use less, right? Like if you want to create a forest, it is great if you can create it out of 10 trees instead of 100, because 100 trees obviously is going to be more. I'm bubbling again, aren't I? Anyways, time triggers, yes. Time, try to avoid updating it way too often. If on way too many places, right? You can have one of these or two maybe, but the more you use it, the more time triggers you use, the more calculating the game has to do, and the worse it's gonna get. The same goes, as I've said, for the recursive functions that I've created here. You should never have an infinite loop if it's not necessary, right? If I have here, like after 5 seconds, just update the kill count. In this case, it's all right. It's the same thing as if I set the time trigger to 5 seconds. It's not that much. That is going to be just this delayed function that's going to call itself again and again and again. And after 5 seconds, it's not gonna reflect really hardly on anything, right? Unless there is some insane calculating going there. So yes, that is the time triggers. Animations, ideally about 40 to 50 objects in your game should be active, no more. Like, you probably can go more, but it will get laggy. So try to stick with basics, turn off everything you don't need to for the game to look good. Of course, that I don't want to tell you to make it ugly, but try to restrain as much as possible. And I know it's hard because for me it's like impossible. Okay, next thing, lights. You should use as few light sources as possible because they are really expensive to calculate, and until there is some optimization in game, and there will be, but until then you should try to use as few as possible, because as you know that there's like what, one light source only allowed and visible on mobile devices, and any more placed light sources like candles or the lanterns or anything, they will not work as a light source anymore. So try to stick with as low number of light sources as possible. The same thing goes for particles. If particles are great for making your game look great and amazing, but you shouldn't turn a lot of them at once if it doesn't really, if it's not necessary, right? Last thing that I've remembered, there was a last question for Oknog, and I suck at reading long texts, honestly. It is this testing, right? And F11 was there. F10, F11 is spelled right. F11, if I remember correctly, is an animator test, and it just runs all the animators. And as you can see, the dragons are happily going around their paths. So F11 is just for testing animated objects that are already animated through animators. It doesn't work for script, right? No scripts will be running here. You can also test with F10, but F10 I think is just what is F10? Oh, it's just from a position, I think. Yes, it's just a game testing, and you can actually change the game modes, and I have missed this for so long because I tend to overlook a few stuff. So F10 is just testing your game from a current view, right? Your player won't get spawned on the spawn point. But the really cool thing is that you can set here in the test, you can set a profile for, you can see on low mobile how it's gonna look, and this is super useful for these animated objects, light sources and stuff, to check how it's gonna look on a mobile phone, because there is many things that are sacrificed on mobile. And if you look, yeah, right, see, this is how my dragons ended up. I was so sad when I've seen this for the first time, and when I realized that these aloe vera leaves have really low lods. They are disappearing way too sooner than the dragons. So once they go away from you, they are these ugly little caterpillars. It's so terrifying, right? So these are the things that you can you can really check on when you test with these low settings. And yeah, I hope I didn't skip anything important, and I am sorry if I did. You feel free to comment the video if you have any more questions, and I will try to answer it all. And thanks again to Oknog for suggesting this video. If you have any suggestions, any ideas about the next thing you would like to see, feel free to contact me, and I will try to, do it. And sorry, Oknog, if I misspelled your name, but I don't see many other ways to spell this, so should be right. Oknog. Still cool. Anyways, this is everything for today, guys. So hope you've enjoyed, hope you will take something from this, because there is this creative competition going on if you didn't hear, and I'm sure that you will need to optimize it quite a lot. Anyways, guys, see you in 14 days. Bye.